Hi, everyone. Hello, Fanny. Hello, Brad. Hello,
Hey,
Karen.
Diane.
Hello. So good to be here with you on stage. Yeah, I'm so glad that I can actually see you in a physical space. I would love to be with you, and I would love to be with all of you. But still, very glad to be among you today, even if only virtually. So I'm Diane Drubet, and I'm actually here wearing three different hats. I am the founder of We Are Museums, an international community of museum changemakers. I also advise the Tezos ecosystem for the art and culture, and I curated this panel discussion. So before jumping in the heart of our topic today, I would like to invite all art and culture professionals to join our new program called WAC, W-A-C, Web3 for the Art and Culture. So it is a new program where We Are Museums is partnering with the Tezos ecosystem and especially TZ Connect, a daughter company of Tezos based in Berlin. And this program aims to guide art and culture institutions towards the understanding of and the adoption of Web3 with the first focus on tokenization. So this week, we are launching our weekly discussions with the Blockchain Art Directory. Thank you, Fanny. So every Wednesday at noon ET or 6 p.m. CET, we will have this online discussion around this topic. And then I'm very excited to announce for the first time our upcoming 8 weeks fellowship program, including a big hackathon. So yeah, it will be all about art and culture institutions working on tokenization and hopefully producing 8 prototypes. So yeah, the goal will be really to have these prototypes to help find solutions to tackle the current social, environmental, and financial crisis. So it's not something on top of everything, but really coming to serve the current missions of cultural institutions. So, well, I hope to see you online next Wednesday for our WAC Weekly. But for now, let's get inspired and better understand why and how museums should exist in the metaverse. I am very happy to welcome Fanny Lacoubet. She is a co-founder of Blockchain Art Directory and an amazing crypto art advisor. Brad McDonald is the director of creative media at Smithsonian Art Plus. Karen Levy, art and tech entrepreneur and collector at the DSL Collection. And our host for today's discussion is Jessie Damiani. He's founder of Post Reality Labs, but also curator and director of simulation literacies at Next Museum, Forbes writer, and a fabulous future thinker. Jessie, the stage is yours, and have a beautiful time together.
Indeed. And what I really love about this, too, is that we're talking about the metaverse, doing it in a very metaversal way. No amplification. We're all hearing it sort of in our earbuds, and we're virtualizing, and so it's like a great entree. We had a really amazing prep call in advance for this talk, and with that, we realized that in order to do this talk the right way, we have to first do the sort of impossible task of giving some type of frame or definition to the metaverse. So I want to kind of open up to that, can of worms really quickly, but particularly with a lens around museums. What is the metaverse in the context of a museum, and how is it maybe different than some of the digital programming and digital offerings and new media art that have come up to this point?
Who wants to take it? Sure, I'll start. First, what the metaverse is not, this is not a video game. I feel like there's a lot of confusion around that because there's a lot of games, online gaming that use virtual worlds, but really the definition of the metaverse, for me at least, would be an online, mostly 3D world where you can interact with other people via avatars, do activities like games, but also openings for exhibitions or have 3D museums even, and and there's, I'm sure we'll get into it, but there's definitely different types of metaverses, and it existed actually before crypto. Like if you think about Roblox or Facebook, now Meta, they probably will not use crypto. So there's, it's now we're having a new age of metaverses, and I'm sure I can let you
Sure.
go there.
Thanks for handling that part, because that's the hard part. I think when I'm thinking about the metaverse too, and this is going to tie into museums, I'm thinking about it as sort of this multimodal experience. It could certainly be like this 3D avatar-driven experience that's shared and collaborative, but I'm also thinking about it as almost like an extension of just XR experiences, where it could be something that exists in virtual reality in parallel to something like AR, in parallel to a browser-based experience, in parallel to your SMS connection. And all these systems can actually communicate and talk to one another where the user is. And by creating kind of an adaptive system where all these technologies just talk and share to one another, I think we can then get to the museum component, which is like, how do you dissolve the walls of a brick and mortar institution? Where do you then meet visitors where they're at? And I think a lot of museums are facing this as sort of an identity thing. You have all these DIY initiatives where museums are sort of like touring their exhibits, but what if you don't have to ship that all in a shipping container or a crate? What if it's something that is just eminently portable? And you can broaden your audience, you can get deeper engagement, and you can even find new audiences, which is something museums are, I think, somewhat desperate to do.
Yeah, I think you all both describe it very well. On a practical side, I would like to say that us as a collection, we have been digitizing works, and we're now on the Metaverse with some projects to really create some new spaces. And today we have a digital twin. We're going to experience the art together, and I think this is also the component of the Metaverse, is being social, creating new experiences, but also how with your physical works you can actually embark it in digital spaces. We have been doing this with DSL collection for some time, and on the different projects, even if we have physical spaces, like in Shenzhen with the Pingshan Museum, virtual reality experiences, we also created the same experiences on the Metaverse. And it was incredible. Last Saturday, we were connected from China and New York on an experience together to visit art and to meet other people. I think this is what you were saying, Fanny. It's very important.
Yeah, if I could build on that, I like to think about what's happening with the metaverse like light. You know, it's a wave and a particle, and the particle those are the spaces and places that the metaverse embodies. But the wave aspect of the metaverse is much more about people and how people engage with each other, and the new sort of emerging modes of connection that we're seeing through the metaverse. Fanny, you brought up, you sort of teased in your last comment this idea that I think is really profound that you've shared around thinking of the metaverse as a public good, a public forum, versus a closed metaverse. Could you say a little bit on that?
Oh, yes. This is, well, we're at a moment, like a very important moment, where we're all talking about going from Web 2 to Web 3. So Web 1, for like just a little reminder, Web 1 was really at the beginning of the internet. Then Web 2 is kind of where we are right now, with like the internet being really controlled by a few big corporations like Facebook, Google, Amazon, and the like. And Web 3, we're all talking about having a more decentralized approach where metaverses, but also companies and projects, like, do not actually belong to one company, like a Twitter, you know, like where not one person can say like, yes, this is going to disappear, and you or you know, say that like they want to remove some content and they can because they own the database, and you don't own anything, right? Like with social media, you give your rights to Facebook, and we're at the point where there's a lot of attention on the metaverse, on crypto projects, but and Facebook changing its name to Meta shows this will to control the metaverse and to replicate what we have now in Web 2, being like closed metaverses, where if you think about it, like what the crypto world is trying to do is multiple open metaverses and different ones, like maybe one for culture, maybe one for your social life, like maybe one for dating, and bridges between them. And the reason it works is because you have this like NFT is like the stuff you can get inside the metaverses, and because it's one format, one standard, it can work in all these metaverses and being like used on this metaverse, but also on this metaverse. And by stuff, I mean it can be an avatar, it can be a dress, an accessory, anything that you purchase in these metaverses. So this is critical. I mean, and it's like kind of keep me up at night. It's not that many things that keep me up. You can ask my husband. I sleep very well, but that really is.
Can I just add on to that? There was, like a lot of times when we're thinking about sort of NFTs and objects and artifacts within the metaverse, there are these things that are like real world representations, digital representations of real world things. I'm also really, the thing that's keeping me up at night is thinking about the ideas that are represented. Like, how can communities have deeper ownership over their cultural heritage, a more present voice in the conversations and the narrative that is driven around maybe their objects or their belief systems. And I think the metaverse is a place where they can start to actually say, like, oh, now we're going to own that narrative in a way that maybe they don't in the real world. Because, I mean, particularly within cultural institutions, there's sort of a challenging history of object collection and sort of like trying to decolonize a lot of this idea and address sort of past grievances. And I think there's a place within the metaverse for communities to have more power and agency over their narratives.
I would like just to, on what you're saying, I think it's really interesting also to see that Web 3.0 is about also content creation that is making an economy also out of it. We see that it's a trillion business industry with the biggest companies on the metaverse. And what is exciting is to build these communities, but also to integrate new ways of innovation and creation. And I think we are really merging the art and the technology with this time of the Web 3.0, which is super interesting.
And what do you see as the role of museums in being part of Web3, museums and cultural institutions, of being part of Web3, part of these bridges to communities, part of these bridges that empower communities to own their histories and their culture and their legacy? Because there's so much talk about disintermediation that I think it would be wonderful if we could kind of dive into those waters and kind of think about where cultural institutions kind of fit in this decentralized landscape.
I think it's a super interesting subject because we since as DSL collection started, the idea was always a museum without wall, and how you could use and create with the technology to have the best experience, because this is the main point. And so we started with like virtual reality since 2015. And what has been really incredible is to actually, while we're speaking today, being able to share the collection of Chinese contemporary art and artists in different locations and also online. And I think that today what we are seeing and what is important, our goal with creating on the metaverse, is to have holistic experiences, but also to open up to new audiences, to make sure that you have also a community and collaborations on this project. And today our metaverse or space is next to NYU space. It's next to Pingshan, based in China, and I think this is really the project that we are creating on the metaverse, is to really bring collaboration, to bring freedom of people to actually go in the space, look around, socialize, and that's super exciting. That's love to hear.
Yeah, there was. Yeah, I think it's going to change. Museums and cultural institutions may need to sort of adjust their concept, self-concept, and their identity. Like, what is their role within the metaverse? Instead of being the absolute author of the story, but actually embracing communities and engaging with them to help, like, refine those stories and surface the most relevant elements. I keep thinking, I was just working on an exhibit where we talked about the video game Never Alone, which was developed in conjunction with a Alaskan community, where that community was actually brought into the game development studio as part of, well, as owners, part owners of the development studio, so they could really, really have that story and shape it. And I think about like museums in that way, or whether it's like our approach to DAOs, like are they philanthropic DAOs, or they're curatorial DAOs, where people are like getting together in the metaverse to talk through sort of in this way where nobody is the absolute author, but are collaborating to determine sort of like what are the stories worth telling, and then engaging with museums and cultural institutions. Like, I'd love to see museums reaching out to these kinds of communities and saying like, you help us figure out what the story is, instead of curators saying like, from this position of absolute authority, this is the definitive story.
Yeah, and Karen, you mentioned like more engagement, and this is something that we've seen like in every cultural institution, that like it's been almost an entire generation that's been alienated from going to museum, from appreciating and living with art, and I know there's a lot of criticisms on NFTs, and people are like, oh, this look bad, and it's just for like collectible things, but there's also some good things that like you can really reach these people, like the younger audience, where they are in the metaverse, where they also go for many other things. They work as well. Like some people, especially working in the web, like not necessarily crypto, but they spend their life online. So I feel like this is something like it's an opportunity, and it's not all needed. Like not all museums will need NFTs. Like it's really a discussion like that Diane and I are trying to have with museums, because it's not for everybody, and there are other ways that you can engage with younger crowd, but it is an option. And there was this article about Jamie Holmes in ArtNet News a few days ago, and he's quite the sensation like this week, and you can see one of his work actually at B10 at Brodsky's booth, and he said that he never set foot in a museum before he turned like 30, and still when he wanted to go, he spent a month like thinking about it, not knowing what to wear to go to a museum, and like having this like anxiety about like going there because he did not belong, and since then he said like, oh, I've turned around like so many of my friends, like, and introduced them to like culture, and you see a lot of tours here, like for like crypto people and DAOs, like Friends with Benefit. Like there's a lot of tours of the main fair for this younger audience, and it's amazing. It's like to see more people interested in art generally.
I'm going to riff off that for a second. I think it's also really super important because a lot of cultural institutions are also seeing their donor base, for lack of a better term, age out. And so they're looking for younger audiences. How do you engage with them? How do you speak to them? Again, how do you meet them where they're at? And I think NFTs, to your point, are maybe not the only way to do it, but it's certainly a way to meet a certain very engaged audience. And so when you're thinking about sort of like engagement and broadening your reach, you could do the shotgun approach where you're like, we want to appeal to everybody. Or you could target some smaller segment of the population who is just particularly passionate in a very specific way. And NFTs and the metaverse, that community is pretty passionate.
There's this way in which it's precipitating institutions who have deeply considered their local presence to also now consider their international presence, or even just more broadly than local or regional. And there's something that comes to mind with what you're talking about, which is at one point in the past, like sort of before this all, the rocket to the moon of the metaverse, I was speaking to the global head of music at Roblox, and he was talking about the Lil Nas X concerts that took place there. And one little data point that he gave that I think is really profound to consider is he said there were many people that, like millions of people turned out to these concerts. It was amazing. But a number of these people, this is not just their first virtual concert ever, this is their first concert ever. And so thinking about all the firsts that young people will experience in the metaverse as opposed to the physical world, and thinking about what that does, kind of like to building off many of the points you're making, it's a really, really subtle and profound shift. We're talking about a lot of the opportunity spaces for museums, and I want to kind of flip that coin a little bit now and also sort of reference that this is a scary proposition to institutions that are often slow moving. So let's kind of talk through what some of the resistance points are, the friction points for institutions, and maybe as we go, like work towards some of the resolutions or possible provocations to those friction points.
Control. I work with the Smithsonian, federally funded and just laden, heavy, burdened with bureaucracy. As much as I love the Smithsonian, but to engage with something new and novel and innovative, and like it's glacial. And so, like I find with a lot of the technology I work doing with the Smithsonian, there's a lot of sort of like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be secure. People's personally, their PII, their personally identifiable information. It's safe. And sort of just assuaging people of their fears of what could possibly go wrong. And so to your point, I think it's sort of like anticipating these things, planning for them, and just having those conversations early on. But I think different institutions, like maybe Smithsonian is at one end of the sort of like the resistance to those ideas, and then there's going to be lots of museums that are just like, sign me up.
But it's also, I think we're not giving enough credit to museums. Like they are not the like slow, old dinosaurs that we imagine. And when we look at like the early discussions in crypto, like 2019, 2020, there were not that many galleries, right? Like interested, because crypto was kind of like killing the intermediary. So it's like a direct threat to galleries. And it's like, you take a little bit of a moment to adapt a system that is going to try to kill you. And museums actually had, I can't hear my, okay. Museum had a lot of champions like you, inside the museums who like started the discussion, and like MoMA started the discussion. And that doesn't mean that they did something early on. But yeah, I can't hear anything in my ear, but that's fine. And yeah, like they're very interested. They're thinking about it, and something that needs to be said. It's also like, yeah, they're right to have fears, and we've seen a lot of experiments done this year in museums, and like they have to take it slow as well. And to be honest, starting with if you are in a museum, like starting with your masterpiece as a test with crypto, do not do it. Like, I mean, this is like burning your IP and burning your like patrimony and everything that that your museum stands for. So yeah, do tests, iterate, and slowly rely on your champions and like you. I'm sure you're giving a lot of hugs and like reassuring.
Yeah,
be okay.
It's going to be okay. But I really love that point. That sort of like, it doesn't need to be full-on embracing of all these ideas. You could kind of dip your toes into that water, find the lower risk property that you might want to mint as an NFT, and kind of like get into that. And that's also why I think about sort of this multimodal approach to it. Is it doesn't need to just only be a 3D immersive avatar-driven space, but there's steps that we can take towards that. And I think identifying those baby steps, developing a level of comfort, then moving to the next step, develop a level of comfort and sort of maybe mastery, iterate at that level and move on.
Yeah, and really learning from that. I don't think, like, I mean, even talking to artists, like most of the artists who've done like several NFT or metaverse experiments, like they always say like, if I had known more, I would not have done it the same way. And it's and that doesn't mean that they did something wrong. It's just, like learning by doing.
They're effectively sketching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what you were saying is extremely right, and it's so interesting to see that we're at the beginning of it, and I think that we cannot rely only on people coming to museums, and post-COVID we've seen that people now want to educate themselves also online. They want to experience, and what you're both doing with talking to museums, I think this is something we understood with DSL because we're super small and we can go fast, in terms of project. But we also understood that we cannot ship the works as before. So the whole also project is helping us to showcase some of the art that we could never show. And I think this in the museums, when you see the incredible collection they have in storage, it makes also a lot of sense to show it and to showcase it.
So I want to leave a little time at the end for audience Q&A. We have about 5 more minutes to leave time for that. So I know that I'm again asking for something impossible, but we've talked a lot about the up to now moment at the intersection of institutions in the metaverse. But now let's blast out into the future a little bit. What does a protopic or even positive future where cultural institutions and museums are part of the metaverse look like to you? What does that entail?
I can give my version of the unicorn future. I think everything related to the metaverse, and if you have tried to go to one of the crypto metaverse, it's still very clunky. Every time I go there, I feel dumb and like I'm hitting walls and I feel drunk, like in that metaverse. But we have to think 5 steps forwards. Like a lot of big companies are like Apple and I mean Google and so on. They're investing a lot in AR hardware right now. So we have to imagine this like when the metaverse is actually going to be way more included and way easier to navigate, but also in relation with like physical assets. So I think this integration, we still very separate, right? Look, what's online, what's physical, and I think we're going to see way more experiments and way smoother experiments as well. So I think that's what I'm hoping for. I don't know if I should hope for anything.
I think some of what I'm hoping for is like approaching exhibits in more of an adaptive way without saying this exhibit, it's been honed, it's been curated, it's been crafted, and it's done. Like maybe changing our definition of what done looks like. And sort of embracing this idea that there might be multiple voices that are contributing. There's some sort of curatorial voice that's maybe framing everything in such a way that it makes sense within the conversation, but you're engaging different communities at different levels and like engaging them to like create content of their own that is maybe in response to the larger framework. And I think there's a really interesting opportunity through this as like a mechanism for dialogue outside of the walls of the institution itself. I'd love to see more of that.
Yes, this is really true. And I really think that also, all this collaboration part, when you do a project, you have designers, architects, artists. And I think with the metaverse, we're hoping that this will be, bringing people together, bringing social interaction differently, bringing experience, but also humanity. And I think to sustain with the art and for cities, for everyone, it is important today to be part of this project. So yes, the hardware is probably not there yet, but I think it will come. It will come.
Ooh, one more thing. Years ago, in another life, I was an animator, and I was working on an animated series with a guy, and he was like, you know what I love about animation? He's like, it doesn't need to obey the principles of reality. It can be whatever you want it to be. And this is pre-VR by quite a bit. And that got me thinking on a project I was recently developing that we were going to do a VR component. And everybody's first blush response was like, let's create the exhibit in VR. Then anybody can visit it. And that's like, that's cool, because then you're expanding your reach. But then this space, the environment itself, doesn't need to have walls. It doesn't have to be things that you're hanging objects on. It doesn't need, vitrines and display cases on hardware. Like this space itself could illustrate the fundamental concepts at work. the space can be part of the exhibit in a way that you just can't do in a brick and mortar situation.
I mean, architects have been like very, very excited about these virtual worlds because you do not abide by the rules of gravity, the rules of like the weather, and right now what you see is like very similar to even some metaverses literally replicate. Like you can buy Japan if you want, like and the houses have gutters. Why? It's not raining in the metaverse, and it's like it's easier as a start because it's allowing us to be comfortable. But there are some amazing experiments where it's like it can be a flying bubble because you can fly in the metaverse. Like it can be like anything, and like I think it's gonna really grow also like the field of architecture. To be honest, like to do that. I mean, Kenny Schachter did a metaverse with Zaha Hadid studio, and it's beautiful. I mean, it is mind blowing.
Yeah, I would love to see, just total tangent, I'd love to see sort of like the dialogue and the evolution of architecture as like the metaverse designers are sort of influencing real world architects and back and forth. Like 20 years from now, just do a check-in and be
Okay,
like,
we're too far in the
what happened?
future. We have to stop. Like.
No, I like that view.
We're done.
I actually just wanted to throw in, if that's a subject of interest for you, Space Popular is doing incredible work right in that sweet spot. And so just wanted to kind of give a shout out. And also, kind of building off some of the earlier points, Rachel Rawson made an experience in 2017 called The Sky is a Gap. And it was a VR experience where the experience moves in relationship to the movement of your body. So time is literally kind of controlled. You can scrub backwards and forwards in time and control the speed of the flow of time based on your movement. And when I was talking to her about that piece and asking about the creative process, she said, in VR, reality is the medium. And I think that's such a powerful, quick way of capturing what's possible with the metaverse is it's like, what's the new relationship to reality you can build around artworks, around cultural artifacts, all types of things. And with that, I do want to open to Q&A. I should be able to hear you if you raise your hand. I should be able to hear you in this earpiece, and I'll restate the question. Oh, there's a microphone coming to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Fanny, this is for you. So I'm wondering, in this day and age of where we're really trying to break out of boxes and be more inclusive in our curatorial practices and welcoming the younger generation and kind of refocusing our energies, you had said that you would not suggest to cultural institutions to mint a masterpiece. Why is that?
I mean, first reason is that artworks are the wealth of museum, and I think the same way they're being right now very careful with insurance, exhibition, loans, and everything. They have to be very careful about anything that they do with their like what I call their IP, but their artworks, and it's great to experiment and I'm very glad that actually like museums are experimenting. I'm not saying they should not do anything and wait for it to be perfect, but we're at the point where not everything is decentralized, and even for NFTs, like we have like a few platforms, right? We're talking about OpenSea, Super Rare, when we really should be talking about the artist and like what they do, and maybe having a few aggregators, but who cares that they are on OpenSea or so. A lot of companies have been, like helping museums as advisory, but also to mint, like. Be it like a digital collectible or just like a digital twin of the artwork, and we haven't figured out everything. So I'm afraid for the museums that like they commit to something and do something with their masterpieces, and now this masterpiece is kind of burnt into like what they can do in the future with this masterpiece and NFTs, and this is a big decision to just say like, okay, now I can never do anything again with this Leonardo because I minted it back in March or whenever was the Uffizi experiment, and yeah, it's kind of dangerous, I think.
What type of work work would you suggest to cultural institutions? They might want to start out doing, for example, fractional NFTs.
I think it's
what would be low risk?
But
You had
that's kind of what we're like. I don't think I have the solution, because it's really the discussion with the museum, like what they're comfortable with, like and this was the idea that Diane had for like a fellowship for museums, like or residency, where we can have the discussion between museums, like with experts who have tried things, who are have learned already things that they should not do, what they should do, and but there's so many people that need to be part of that conversation, and honestly, at that point, it's discussing and talking to as many people as they can about it.
Thank you.
Hi, great talk, first of all. I'm building a little bit on your question, which is, if a museum owns an artwork, does that mean they can mint it in this sort of Web3 artist-based world? And does that open questions about private collectors potentially thinking they can mint digital art that they own?
I think we all three might have difference of experience with that. I mean, a lot of the work I do is cultural institutions, and so there are objects on loan from communities, or there are objects that have just been part of the sort of like the Smithsonian collection, about 150 million objects that are in the collection. There is and they have different capacities. I mean, a lot of museums, to Karen's point, are like have sort of like DPO initiatives or digital processing initiatives, where they're kind of making their assets available through sort of like open access to communities to use them, depending on sort of what the contract is. They could do kind of whatever they want with them. I've done work like that through the Metropolitan Museum of Art as well as the Smithsonian. But I think it kind of, depending on the relationship to that object, its provenance, who has a stake in it, goes back to her point about sort of like what is maybe the risk management around a piece, who is claimed to ownership over that. I'm going to be curious to hear both of your perspectives.
I think the ownership is still a vague subject. Yeah. Personally, as a collection, I will say that we are still doing our homework on the NFT. We have, of course, platforms who wanted to work and mint our works. So on your question, I think it's really interesting because we decided to be a public collection where collectors decide to be private. And it's the same with the NFTs. Like, do you want to open up your collection? I think if we're entering in the NFT sphere, what is important for us, and I think that was you were mentioning about, is really including the artists, Fanny, you were saying, and Douglas. And I think for the museums, I mean, we saw what happened with the Uffizi, or the British Museum NFT. It's really for people to actually own a part of an art work that belongs to the museum, but it's also driven with, I would say, also making business revenues for the museum. So let's put it this way. So, it's very different for private collections and museums on that note, but
and I think this is, there's a lot of IP lawyers like looking into that, and they're kind of, like very scared. I mean, if you talk to them, they're not having the time of their life with all of these use cases. And it depends if it's a public domain, if it's a copyrighted work, et cetera, and like the contract that the museums have like with the collectors who donated the works. And that's why it's like so many people involved. You cannot just do that in a like on the whim. You're like, oh yeah, like great, like look at that, like Mona Lisa, let's just tokenize this thing, like, and see where that goes. And so it's
one lawyer that is having a great time with it is Sarah Connolly Odenkirk. So definitely find her and follow, at least for North America. Find her and follow her because she's really kind of blazing that trail.
One other maybe workaround.
This is not legal advice, by the way. I'm doing the disclaimer for you.
I am not a lawyer. But one workaround is that the objects and artifacts are not the only thing that museums have of value. Ideas, conversations, access. to information is of enormous value. And so you could mint an NFT that is a twin of some object or a key piece of art, but you can also mint access, information, time with a lead curator on an exhibit, sort of like an additional layer of information that isn't actually normally available to the public. So I think that's one of the things that another layer that museums could consider in terms of what they could offer in the space.
And we need more R&D. We need more like academic research. And the reason why we're doing Web3 for arts and culture is also to provide documentation. And you know, we are talking like right now about some experiments, and we've all heard a little bit about it. But honestly, like, I don't know all the details of like the UFIC, like tokenization, and right now it's nowhere to be found. So. If you're interested, contact me to help with the documentation.
On that note, everybody, please follow these three, as this little morsel has shown you they're absolute geniuses and so thoughtful in this space. And with that, thank you all so much. Please join me in a huge round of applause for all of these.
Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you.
Thank you.